when you were away in Christmas, this you're talking about the 40s, a war on rationing, all the rest of it. So when you had toys, you made the toys yourself. And this is my private collection of the toys I used to make. And believe it or not, that was a boat. It was a bit of bendweed, a wee skimmer in the bottom of it. And you got a bit of stick, and you put that in it like that. And that's it. We used to race them for the greenhouse to Murphy's Rook, see who built the fastest. And that was it. That was the sailing boat that we had. Getting money there wasn't much money about the place then, so you didn't want to earn a wheen of shilling. This was the best time of the year to get it. The wisp. Don't you use a room of wisps? So you went round with these here, midnight, you knocked the door, Happy New Year, would you buy a wisp? So, but they took it off you because they took last year's out and threw it away and put the new year in. And the tradition was there would always be food in the house while there was corn straw. And there's a wee gun there, but I'll demonstrate that later on. But the last time I did this here, I went to a very famous man called Captain Carson. Captain Carson was a captain in the First World War. And I suppose like all men of that ilk, he was very partial to the drink. But I went along in New Year, rode a bike, no lights, nothing at all, right along to where Turkington says now. That was Carson's farm, and my dad worked there. Went along, knocked the door, and I heard the big voice yelling, "What's that?" And I thought, oh no, Carson's full. But anyway, Mick come, they had two sons, Mick and Lou. Lou went to be a doctor, Mick was a pilot during the war. But Mick loved to dress up. He come to the door with his leather jacket, fur-lined, and silk scarf and all to be at the door. And he yells back, "It's Albert's wee fella. Oh, give him half a croon and send him on." Well, half a croon then was absolutely unreal. And I showed this to my ma. That was the last I saw it. It disappeared. But I used to go along for school because of the horse as well as they were tractors. I would sit with them. And my dad would have let me on the horse and that. But I come along and he wasn't there. And I seen him coming up the road in the push bike up the lane. Mrs. Carson steps out. "Where were you, Albert?" "In the town, ma'am." "Oh, what were you doing there?" "Oh, a message for the boss." "Oh, what was the message?" "Oh, it's a wee thing he wants." So she searched the saddlebag and pulled the wee thing out. It was a bottle of whiskey. And she smashed it in the road. And Carson was going to kill my dad because of whiskey. But then the last time I saw him, I went along. I was just coming into my teens then. And, Robert Warnick was good at cursing, but he wouldn't have compared with Captain Carson when he got in full flight. He really cursed hyphenated. Screw something driver. And it put a swear word in a split word with it. But I hear the screams and oaths and what he would do with these two sons. And I wondered what they'd done to him. And then they had him tied to a cowtail pump. And he couldn't even get a drink out of it. He was lying below it, tethered to it like a dog, roaring and yelling. And the sons wouldn't even come out of the house, or the wife, just left him there. But to me, I suppose, Ballywalter then was all these characters. They were unbelievable. I'm sure you heard the end of it. It's been told before, but it was Dougie Finn told me it. And it's genuine. When he come to the factory, this is a man come from Bradford. And he goes into a factory with 6 lasses from Ballywalter. Didn't understand one word they said. Had no idea what they were talking about. But anyway, he got his factory up and going, and Molly, my cousin, she worked the big presser. But whatever happened, she pulled the plug, and there was a big bang. And he, of course, Dougie ran over, and she's standing, look at women, she says, with her hands crossed over her breast, like us here. He says, "Oh," she says, "I thought I was sent for." He says, "I never sent for you." No, she says. So she sent for her Harry, and he was there. So Harry, he was the handyman. He did the only thing he didn't fix, he fixed. He says, "Harry, see that cable?" He says, "It must be a bit short." And when Molly pulls the presser, it pulls out of the wall and it bangs. "Can you fix it?" Right, boss. Away he went. And he came back half an hour. "I got that fixed, but you were wrong." He says, "What do you mean wrong?" "He said it was too short." "Aye." "No," he says, "it wasn't long enough." And I can't go down without mentioning Patrick's dad here. To me, he was Ballywalter to me as a wee fella, because he could just do anything, play any musical instrument, clog dance. He had bees, train kids singing birds, and we got a haircut for tuppence. Sometimes he can you a penny out back if there's a big crowd in. And you run up to Mrs. McCulloch's and got 4 caramels for that, It was good. But, the best, there's an element of truth in this. Big Davy come down this day, plopped himself in the chair. Tie her up there, John. John says, "Are you ready for the big day?" He says, "The big day?" He says, "The 12th. He says, "There's been no 12th for me this year." He says, "You hid. He goes, sure, you were the master of the lodge last year." He says, "I'm retired, and the Waynes has bought me and the wife a holiday, and it just happens to fall then, and we're going." Well, he said, and where are you going? He says, "We're going to Italy, and we're staying somewhere about Rome." Well, John looked at him, and "Rome?" he says, "And you're going to the field?" "Not the field." All right, so he snipped and clipped and tidied them up and bid him time of day. So about a fortnight or 3 weeks later, he's wanted to meet his mate Davy. "Well," he says, "did you get to Rome?" He says, "I did." "And what did you do?" He says, "We went into a place, a big chapel," he says. "And the side of the roof what the boy lay on his back and painted it." But he says, "You want to see that? That was some job." But he says, then we went into this big square, and I thought maybe it was a football match. There was that many folk, and looked all around them, and I said, "Boy, that's a crowd." But I seen this wee man come up with a wee white hat in his head and a cloak on, and he spoke about 6 languages. He says, "Did not." And it was great the way he could do this, But he says he didn't know any Ulster Scots. I noticed that. But he came down and he walked among the folk. And he came over and I watched to see, for he didn't want to be ignorant, he says. And the women curtsied and the man would got down on yon knee. Well, he come straight over to me and I got down on yon knee and he put his hand on my head. And he spoke to me. And John was spitting feathers. But he says, "What would he say to you?" He says, "In the name of God, boy, who cut your hair, to God?" But there were just magic minutes in your life for them, Tom. And the nicknames they all got. I told you last week about Cain. But another thing great was Capernaum. Did you know him at all? He was one of the Canaans. And he preached in the wee gospel hall. But he did the reading of the Bible. But he come to the disciples going into Capernaum, and he said they went into Capernaum. so he become Capernaum the rest of his life. But his other classic piece was, what was it? When he got ready for war, he girt his loins, but he said he girt his lions. He thought he was paralysed. That's why he went to the war. I hope he has a strong stomach. Up the top of, what do they call it, Bartlett's Hill now. It was up the stump road, the second hill. There were Davisons on the inside of the road and the 4 McCrackens on the other side. They were 2 brothers, 2 sisters, never married. And boy, were they odd. We had to go there every Friday for buttermilk. Cousins and me, 6pence for 6 quarts of buttermilk. And we had to carry that in a wire can back then. But anyway, it turned out they only had a couple of milking cows. And they said to her, the young heifer was ready for mating. So she's run over to Andy Davis and wanted to know for Andy who was the handiest man with a bull. Oh, Andy says there's no such thing now. He says there's this buddy they call artificial inseminator. And he comes and he sorts you out and he get you a milking calf or a bull calf. Oh, well, she says let him come up. So I don't know how you've ever seen this man. He genuinely existed. If you ever remember Gilbert Harding on the television, he had trilby hat, horn-rimmed glasses, heavy jacket, cavalry twills, brown brogues, dressed for the job, and a wee briefcase, the accoutrements. And he comes in and he says to Sarah, "You have a heifer." "This way, sir." The other 3 were hiding by this time. Leads them down to the buyer. Says, "Well, that's the heifer there." And she says, "Is there anything you need?" "Well," he says, "if you could bring me a basin of warm water and a bit of soap and a towel, please." So over she come with us and she set it all for him. And this time he had the jacket off and the sleeves rolled up, ready for action. And she says, "Is there anything else you need?" "No," he says, "that's fine." Well, she says, "There's a big nail behind the door to hang your trousers on." And this is for the strong stomachs. I tell you, listen to the ministry, wasn't he pleased? But no matter. This boy, he was sadly troubled with bilious attacks. In other words, he broke one very frequently. And every time you met him, he was the last man you would say, how are you keeping, boy? For he started off with the varicose veins and verrucas, and he was right up to dandruff and this head in every organ and muscle and bone inside it. So, and he was standing there blasting away. But these two young boys, they were down the lane and they'd been snaring rabbits, and they'd caught a couple of rabbits. And they come up the lane, and where he slept, there was a wee low window with a curtain. But this big blast would have come, and the curtain would have come out, and the curtain would have come back in again. So they had a wee smile to themselves, and they cleaned the rabbit out, and they run over, and they slipped this insides of the rabbit down the side of the bed, because you could see the big backside of the window. But there was nothing there. I never heard a word about it. So they went down a day later, and they seen his wife, and said, "Hadn't he seen Johnny a bit for a while?" "Oh," she says, "then he tack." She says, "He broke one the other morning, and if you had have seen what come out of him." But she says, "For the help of God and a handle of a wooden spoon, we got to that push back on again." And another, it's so right to talk about death, but at the end of the day, it has its minutes, its humorous minutes. This is another wee man. I knew him and his wife Willie, and they worked in the big estate. They had no family, and when they retired, the boss of the manor, he allowed them to keep the wee house, and he was the gardener, and he could do a bit of gardening at the back, and she would what had then called a flower knot, just a wee bit at the front which you could put wee bunches of flowers in. And I would have called with him now and again, but then I was away, and I come back, and God, I was away about a month, and he had passed away, and I was kind of annoyed. And I went round to see her. It was Florrie, you call her. I says, "What happened to him?" "Oh," she says, "you knew when you say what happened, then the start. Not for he woke that morning to that evening, but every breath he drew." And she says, and then he come in the evening, and I says to him, "Look, I got some new prittas down there. They're nice wee flurry prittas, and I have a bit of fresh bacon. I'll make a wee dinner." He says, "Tell you what, there's wee pamphlet in the garden there, and they're just about ready. I've got to get you out of it." So she says he went down the garden, and he was there a long time, and the pritters were ready and the bacon. I went down. She says he was lying, he had a wee pamphlet with a hand, and he never got it pulled, and he was lying dead with it in his hand. She says, "Hey, what did you do?" She says, "I had to open it in a piece." I laugh hard better at me in jokes than we heard them before. I don't know why. But I'll go back to John again. Partly, this is no true, by the way. And the time of John was the barber, all right, and they cut your hair. So he smoked his pipe, and so you were smelling tobacco around you and all that. But then, the trade was slipping off, because by this time, lasses had took up the job. And of course, they had the perfume and all the bits and pieces, and smelled fragrant around you, and nice haircuts and all this here. And John was complaining to a couple of boys he knew. He says, "When you go up and see, wasn't he Clark? Who was the grave digger before Clark? His name's out of my head. But anyway, he says, go and see him." He says, "What would I see him for?" Well, he says, sometimes folk, there's an accident or die suddenly, and then he got their hair combed and he got there, and he says, "Come and set their hair for them." So he went up and he did this, and he's good at it. And then when he got the women, he could pinch their cheeks and put a wee bit of makeup on them so that they looked great. And your man trusted him to the world. And he says, "Look, I'm going away. If anybody comes up, we want these wee parlours now. If they come down and want to see somebody, if there's something to say to them, just tell me and we'll fix it tomorrow." So we come in the next day, and he says, "You're going on." He says, "Great." But there was a wee woman come in, and she was very vexed. He says, "Why?" He says, "You had her man in a blue suit, and she wanted him in a black one." "Sure," says, we'll get him sorted out." "Oh," he says, "I got it sorted out." He says, "Who'd you do that?" Well, he says, "The boy in the next room." He says he was the same size to half an inch and the same weight to have half a stone. And he says he had a black suit on. He says, "You swap them ever?" Yeah. He says, "I swap their heads ever." But I was talking about, I meant to talk about him last week, a better known, or last month. Davy Oskin. Davy was something special, wasn't he? Have you anything to say to me back alongside me and talk quick for any time to listen to you? That was all you got to them. And when you went in, "Here, wee son, bring that there and tack that there, and whatever you wanted. But I come over from school and they had a field, there's Moyle Hill as it is now, it's very upmarket, but it was a field full of hen houses when I was there. But Davy got these hen houses with a flap. You could lift the flap on the outside. He didn't have to unlock the thing. So I'm coming over from school and I seen this flap and I lifted it up. There's all these eggs. So I wasn't greedy, I just took the hen. And I didn't eat that every day, but I didn't really get a tucky an egg. And then I come up this day and it wasn't left. And there was a wee note pinned up in the corner and I read on it, with a big nail through it, it said, "Ha ha, fooled you this time." So years later, I was walking down, it was actually Jack Skillen's funeral. And I was felling alongside of Davy. So I thought, you had to confess your sins at some time in your life. So I confessed my sins to Davy about stealing his egg. He stopped in the middle of Billy Walter Street. He says, "Willie, Cromie, did you do that on me, a poor orphan boy?" He was always a poor orphan boy. But for the football pitch is now up to school, there, it's a football pitch. Well, that used to be 3 fields and they pulled the dikes down. But there was a fairy tree in the middle of that. You know, the end of Disney. And nobody would pull it down. But Hughie Young was working with Davy. He said, "A lot of nonsense," he says. "I'll soon pull it down for you." So he went up the ladder up in the loft to get the chains and bits and pieces. He fell down and broke his arm. So he never pulled the tree down at all. Well, Robbie and Sammy, they were... But it was the monkey they had. Paddy wrote about that. But how they got the monkey drunk was 2 well-known characters in the town, Gordon White and Alec McCracken. And they had come in with was it cherry brandy? Gordon even told me a bottle of cherry brandy. So they went down the street and were looking for some woman who would accommodate them with a sherry brandy. But there was nobody about, so they come by, and when you looked in them wee houses, you could see on the front door and at the back door. And Sarah was out in the backyard with a scrubbing brush at the clays in the bath set across 2 chairs. And they were looking for Robbie and Sammy, and they couldn't even in. Oh, up the street there, they were there in a minute or 2. So the monkey was tethered to the crook. And McCracken seen a saucer and he put it in the saucer and he slid the monkey a drop of cherry brandy. And the next thing, it had the bottle of cherry brandy drunk and it was starting to squeal. And Sarah came in to see what was wrong, and the monkey jumped on top of her and pulled her hair. And it actually pulled the crook clean off the wall. Gordon said he'd run for his life. But it got out. But they caught it eventually. There was a lot of stories went about they've shot it and it did this and it did that. But it actually went to Bellevue because we checked up to see. It was a boy McCormick, I don't know, Gunnan. A fellow Gunnan for Ballyhalbert brought him that. He was a merchant seaman and they would have brought out pets in. And that's where Robbie and Sammy saw him. Apparently, in the pub, began him a drink. They were getting a drink. And they seen this old gunny sack moving. And Robbie says, "Why, is there a rat in that bag?" And he says, "There's a monkey in it." He says, "What?" And they were very, very fond of pets, renowned for this. Sometimes they went to a farmer, they got £2 or £3 for what they did. But they would maybe give them an old hen that was past point of lay, or a crowd of a litter of pigs, but they couldn't kill them. They took them in the house and they reared them. And the last thing they had was a pig. And Robbie was to go to a funeral and he had the herringbone tweed overcoat. And he went down to get it on. And Sarah had it wrapped around the pig in front of the fire, said, but the pig wasn't wheel. She had wrapped his herringbone coat down with it. And so he got the coat over. But see, when I was working at that time on the NIRTB, the Northern Ireland Road Transport Board, which was here the bus depot. I worked in the lorries, and I worked with a big fella called Pat McKeown. He was the driver, I was the helper. And he had to go down and get the pig to take it away. And Robbie and Sammy went up the garden and sat with their arms around each other and roared like 2 wains. And Sarah had to do the deal with the pig. A thing you had to do when you were a wee fella, you followed your dad into his profession. Well, I followed my dad into his profession and stuck it for 3 days, for he was a pump sinker. In other words, he sunk wells. And the water diviner was the Canon Reverend Jackson. He came in with a wee twig and he walked up the field, and this thing, I thought it was a joke. This thing pointed upwards. And he said, "Down there, Albert, 18, 20 feet. And he walked away and my dad dug, and there it was. But the job I got, when they finished it, the dry built them, stone up. And I was 14-year-old, and I had to stand at the midst of this with a big lorry, a cartload of stains, and I had to break them with a sledgehammer and lower them down to him in a bucket. Well, say, when he got that built, I never built another one. So, a 14-ton sledge. I got a good job in Cromie Road then. That. I was talking about William James Lemon there. That was true about him. When the coal boats come in, when the lorries were coming up, a wee bit of coal would have fell off them. Well, the boat was away out, and William James Lemon went in with a bucket, got 2 or 3 bits of coal. Bryce caught him, and he got 6 months hard labour for stealing the coal. The lorries had spilled it on the roadside. But they were quirk grafters, them boys in them coal boats there. And, the way they had to go in with a shovel and dig it right down to they called it the ceiling. It was the bottom of the boat, but they referred to it as the ceiling to get there, and then shoveled it into it. And
they've got a fibre for that. Well,
that's right.
Hard work.
I got the book of a boy. I think I mentioned it before. The way it worked out, you got the tonnage of the boat, whatever what it was, and you multiply, let's say 120 ton, you multiplied that by 3 and 3 farthings, and then you divided it with the number of men that was on the boat, and that was what they got. But you had to keep a percentage of them for holiday pay, because they once they set on that boat, they were stevedores. They belonged to the stevedores union as soon as they were on that boat. And then the coal men had to keep a book, what boats come in, who men are working, and maybe at the end of the day, Maurice owed you £1, Bryce owed you £2, Grace owed you £1. So they got a week's wages that way. This was their holiday pay. Because it didn't last them too long, did it? Straight to Tate's in the square and getting nerds and come home singing. I used to laugh at them singing, coming up the Ra. They'd have been full, and they would have had a bit of steak in here, and the blood would have been running through it. And the sausages would have been trailed in the road into their pocket. And the dogs would have been running, yowling after them, and all you could hear was Nellie Dean going at the top of their voice, singing, and the noise and the wreck and the Ra. And then they ate this stuff after all that carry on. So what did they, when they can refer to this here then, you see, at Christmas, you made a gun like that, and that was your ammunition, elastic bands, and you put that in there, you pushed it forward, put the elastic band in there and clipped it short, and you did that, an elastic band. I demonstrated that up in East Belfast at the height of the Troubles to the school wains. Would you make me a gun, mister? Oh, what the hell? But there's a boy up the road from me, Davy. He's still alive, and I never forgot him. They lived in what was around the back road, where William James lived. That was the original Presbyterian church, around there. And the Pritchards lived upstairs, George Mahallam and them. Well, David was my mate at school, and Christmas, he came in, boy, see what I got? And he has wee cowboy suit on, with the chaps and the waistcoat, and he kept going with a 100-shot repeater, you know, in the hat with the sheriff's hat on it. And his ma took it off him that night, put it in the box, and he got it next Christmas again. he says, and then she gave it to me the third Christmas, but thank God it didn't fit me, but now, 3 years, and it done him. And that was the nickname. Lita Morrison's son, he had the same, but he was christened the sheriff through it, because he actually wore the badge, even going to school, and he never got nothing else but the sheriff.